All right, we now turn to a story which dovetails off the senseless murder of George Floyd. Saints quarterback Drew Brees received heavy criticism after comments he made Wednesday relating to the American flag and the national anthem kneeling, which started with Colin Kaepernick. Brees apologized yesterday, but that hasn't done much to calm the storm after his initial comments. All right, Cody, let's take a crack at this. What are your thoughts on the reaction to what Drew Brees said?
Yeah, it's hard not to talk about this one. It's been quite a big deal over the last day or two. I think what's going on with Breeze is a symptom of a larger problem we have in the country right now, which there seems to be little to no tolerance on either and all sides. I'm not criticizing protesters or anti-protest, whatever the case may be. There seems to be little room for any sort of complexities or gray area or acceptance of the idea there could be more than one right answer to a problem. Drew Brees is also the victim of a current climate that operates often by a social mob rule, where if you don't fall lockstep with the correct opinion totally and wholeheartedly, then you're just gobbled up and spit out. It's something we've seen for quite a many years now in this country. And, when you look at Brees' original comments and the subsequent follow ups where he further clarified his position, he was really the whole controversy stems from a very small part of his larger argument. In the argument, which he basically completely agreed that he realizes the country doesn't always work for everyone, that minorities are often unfairly targeted and treated by police, and that we still have a very long way to go to get to the vision that the founding fathers intended when they originally wrote the documents that this country system is founded off of. But he also acknowledged that, hey, millions of people have fought and many have died for the idea of true equality and liberty. Some did it on the battlefield, million in others, like his grandfathers, for example, and then others, have done it here in the streets at home with this women's suffrage, civil rights movement, etc. He sees all their struggles, and when a deliberate protest is done during the anthem, he sees it as a disrespect towards their struggles. And to me, that's kind of the crux of all this. There's no correct interpretation of the flag, the anthem, or the protest. Some folks are going to look at the flag, hear the anthem, and they're going to think of all the injustices that their family has suffered at the hands of a system that often doesn't seem to care about them. Other folks like Breeze, they're going to look at it and they're going to look at the positives of this 300-plus-year-old experiment and say, hey, we can still do better. Kaepernick, for better or for worse, you're not ever going to be able to totally shake the opinion of many people that his protests were somehow linked to the country, the military, and just as a whole. Sort of the baby with the bathwater analogy. He didn't kneel at halftime. He didn't kneel before the kickoff. He specifically targeted the national anthem. That's always going to be inextricable to some people. To me, neither side is completely right or wrong, because to me, it's only the symbol of what you make it out to be. Now, was Breeze's comments pretty tone deaf for the moment? Yeah. There was no reason he couldn't have just made some boilerplate, stock, off-the-shelf answer and just unrolled a script and read it and said, hey, good luck, everybody, and rolled on. There was it really the time to kind of bring this back up or beat the horse some more? No. But the character assassination he suffered now is ludicrous. I mean, the man helped rebuild the city after Hurricane Katrina, one of the worst natural disasters in U.S. history. He's been an ambassador of the city and the region. He's donated tens of millions of dollars, volunteered countless hours of time to a community that is majority minority compromised. And no one has ever thought of Drew Brees having a single racist bone in his body until this week. But then suddenly, because he disagrees with a slight interpretation of a part of an argument, that he still largely sides with those who want change. He's simply now a terrible person. He needs to be canceled. He needs to retire. He needs to be thrown out of his official announcing job. Nothing else matters. So I don't like the ridiculous backlash he's gotten. I can understand why people might be upset, but the level that's been taken to it is quite insane. And I think for all the talk of unity right now, it's really easy to do the opposite. And Breeze is an example of that on both sides. Those who are demonizing him and then him stirring the fire for no reason. So I think we can and we should do better than this. To me,
The real sad thing about this whole situation that started with, again, the senseless death of George Floyd is that so much of this, so much of the issues and what occurred and what has occurred afterwards, so much of this we can all agree on if you have any amount of human decency running through your body.
mm-hmm.
Number one, the death of George Floyd was wrong. It was horrific. It shouldn't have happened. Number two, we've seen instances, too many of them, where it appears minorities are treated differently and worse by the police. We've seen that on far too many occasions. Number three, police officers that conduct themselves in such a way should be held accountable. No matter, and that doesn't matter what the race is. And number four, this is an issue that should be protested. No problem with protests. So much of that, so much of that I think we can all agree on, again, if we can operate under the premise that we all have some sort of human decency about us. The problem that we have now, and you mentioned it a little bit, and the word nuance really comes to mind here, because the conversation, once protests become riots, and I think there has to be a distinction. There has to be a distinction between protesting and rioting, because what we've seen transpire the past week in just cities, starting with Minneapolis, and once it happened in Minneapolis, it seemed to spread like wildfire. Once the riots start and you have just utter chaos, people just breaking in to businesses, breaking into stores, and just running out stealing things. And then you had when you it's one thing to be out there protesting, but when you have people throwing projectiles at police officers, whether it be water bottles, whether it be bricks, whatever the case may be, we've crossed the line, and the society is disintegrating into anarchy. That's where we're headed right now. And I can assure you that is not a place we want to go. In the case of Drew Brees said what he said initially, and you're 100% correct when you talk about being tone deaf. I would use the words when you appear to have a lack of awareness. That's how I would put it. But again, when you talk about the First Amendment and you talk about free speech, you hear the phrase "right to your opinion" a lot. But in cases like these, it doesn't appear to be that way. Drew Brees said what he said, and whether you agree or disagree, I didn't find nothing offensive about it. I really didn't. But again, that's where we head into this um, offensive oriented culture where it all depends on the reaction that people have to it. And some people, many of them found his comments offensive. But on the flip side of that, when you go back to Colin Kaepernick, and we know why Colin Kaepernick protested. It was because he was protesting police brutality. But then again, you can also flip the script on that. As much as we talk about the reaction and the offense to Drew Brees' comments, when you protest during that time, you offend patriots. You know what I'm saying? You offend people that have a high degree of respect for their country. And when you protest during the national anthem, people are going to feel some type of way about it. And let's be honest, and I've thought this many a times, even though I understand that is a perfect time to get attention for the issues you're hoping to correct and bring about change and make progress on. But you know as well as I do, there's such a thing as press conferences. Players have press conferences after games, quarterbacks especially. Um, Colin Kaepernick at any time throughout his career, and again, when he started kneeling, it's not like police brutality had just started, and we've seen instances of unarmed black men being killed and being murdered. We'd seen these before. Never heard from him in a press conference. At any time, he could have said, "Hey, guys," talking to the reporters, "we're not going to talk football right now. I want to bring attention to another issue." He had opportunities to do that. He chose to go a different route, which is perfectly within his right. At the end of the day, when you talk about Colin Kaepernick protesting, he's got every right to do so. And on the flip side, I believe anyone, if you don't agree, you should have that right to not agree with the method in which he went about it. I think that's perfectly reasonable. The problem that we're getting into now, and you also touched on it, is the mob culture. If you are not 100% on board with what the mob or the movement, however you want to call it, If you don't fully 100% hop on that bandwagon, you risk being run over. And that's what happened to Drew Brees.
Yep.
The backlash and the response to him, unfortunate, because and to have it come from teammates who know this man. Michael Thomas, Malcolm Jenkins has been a teammate of Drew Brees before he left for Philadelphia. Now he's back with the Saints. The list goes on and on. I agree with you. Of course, we don't know Drew Brees from a can of paint, but by all accounts, he seems like he's class personified. And when you talk about after post Hurricane Katrina, Drew Brees, to me, is kind of a symbolic figure of the rebirth of that city. We talk about football, sports being a microcosm of society. Drew Brees in New Orleans right now, to me, they go hand in hand, and it is an absolute shame to see what has happened to him, and then just the negative. I mean, you've got crowds in New Orleans marching saying "F Drew Brees." It's unfortunate, and he apologized yesterday, and it didn't seem like it helped all that much. So, and we talk again. We go back to free speech. It seems like free speech now is only selectively applied, and in a lot of cases, if you don't 100% agree with what the majority at the time is feeling or saying, you may as well not say anything at all. That's what it comes down to. That's why these topics are so risky and they're so complex. And I would honestly just like to know. I would honestly like to know what what can I do to help. What can I do to help prevent police brutality? I really would like to know. Um, and I haven't discussed this with our counterpart Drink. I have not. I got to be honest. I haven't broached this conversation with him yet. I don't know how he's feeling. Um, I've hinted. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, approaching this segment. Um, and full disclosure, he didn't want to go there. And with that in mind, I respected his opinion, and we didn't go there. But when it got into the Drew Brees situation, I felt like since it had a more sports feel to it. That's why I wanted to address it today. But again, bottom line, what we saw in Minneapolis, we should not have seen. Inexcusable, horrible, and again, I think we can all agree on that. But there are nuances of this that I think it's okay, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for there to be disagreement. But there has to be discussion. There has to be discussion. A lot of the problems that we're coming about today is people want to be completely closed-minded, and they don't want to listen to anybody that disagrees with them.
Yeah, that nuance is like the key of all this. I think like you're talking about is I think there's instead of a black or a white, a one or a zero with these arguments of like Drew Brees, for example, Drew Brees is either a terrible racist or he's perfect. Where in essence there's this huge middle ground where everyone pretty much hangs out of. Like I said, we all pretty much agree. Like you just said, your 4 points. I don't think hardly anyone would disagree. If they do, then well, you can't help them. Like this is what it is. But when you start getting into these details where these tiny little little arguments can just completely throw someone to the side. It's ridiculous. Like you said, how can you have a conversation, a real conversation about change, not just coming off with random boilerplate Twitter speak? Like, how can you actually talk about a subject that's difficult like this when something as small as what he said can make someone a social pariah for the rest of their time? That's just it's insane. So
And
how do
that,
you
yeah,
preach unity and change and conversation, but then as soon as Drew Brees says something you don't like, you crap on him from a hot air balloon? I don't get how that's.
and that's,
We
and,
have
yeah,
to
and
be able
that's,
to talk about these things to go forward.
yeah, and a couple more things. The generalizations that we see, generalizations, they're not good. When we talk about pushing the narrative that every cop is like that cop in Minnesota, Derek Chauvin or whatever
Mhm.
whatever his name was, we know we should know that's not we should know that's not true. Coming from a personal perspective, my father was a deputy sheriff for 10 years in my hometown of Virginia. Um, that's my father. Uh, my father always treated everybody with respect. I know this for a fact, and good man. And just based off what I learned from him, and again, I went back to the question I posed earlier that we can't get an answer right now about what can I do. I go about the business, and I'm sure you do as well. We go back a long way of going about my business, and everybody I come in contact with, treating everybody with respect.
Yep.
That's I think that's at the end of the day, that's all we can ask for. We know everyone does not live like that, and it's a shame that they don't. But from a personal perspective and a personal responsibility, that is what I go about the business of doing, is treating everybody the same and treating everybody with respect. And then last point, going back to the issue of rioting and protesting and that line, the behavior of people that cross the line, and obviously uh, the majority are peacefully protesting. But again, just like one bad cop can ruin it for everybody, a couple agitators here and there, they hijack and the attorney general has used this verbiage as well. They hijack the real issue, and we've seen it. As soon as those riots started, you started hearing the name George Floyd less and less. You started hearing the phrase police brutality less and less, because the story was now the rioting and the burning and communities burning, literally burning down. I remember the first night in Minneapolis when that Target was getting looted, and later in the evening, an auto zone burned down. Think about all the businesses in these communities that have been torched. It's just, and these communities with so many minorities living in them, now they got to go about the business of trying to rebuild. And if you listen to anything that's going on, because we've had these type of riots happen before, it takes years for these communities to get back on their feet. And again, the behavior is bad enough. It's egregious. What is even worse is people of influence living in their privileged lifestyles, because there are plenty of minorities out there that have made successes of themselves and made it good. But it's a shame that those people, almost it seems like they're encouraging that behavior. So now you reinforce the rioting and the looting, and people now legit thinks it's okay. If you saw certain people of influence and prominence come out and say this is not okay, we'd see less of this. It could have been stopped sooner. And oh, by the way, last point that I have,
Mhm.
it's a shame. George Floyd's brother, I've seen him quite a few times, and he has pleaded every time I've heard him, stop the violence. I don't know why people aren't listening. It's a shame his voice is not reverberating and being amplified, because this instance of police brutality started with his brother, and it's a shame people are not listening to him.
Yep, very sad situations. Hope everybody can get through it.